Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Listen with Vobes. I'm Richard Vobes. Welcome along, and welcome to everybody live, and welcome to everybody who is not watching live, but sometime after the event. We are reading Children of the Archbishop. It's the 20th of January 2021 as I make this recording, and out there in the Vobosphere, ready and waiting, we have the lovely Julia, hello to you, Turbo Stream, Billabong O'Neill, who says good afternoon from a soggy South Holland. Hope you are all well and with the houses sale today. Yes, I'm pleased to say that the completion has happened. Yes. Holly and Co, everyone there, sending the Vobes good vibes. Thank you very much. Justine Jones from wet and dull North Somerset. Cooper 68, good afternoon. Audrey Forbes, hello to you. Good afternoon, she says. Dave Yonder, Watcher, the Green Man, afternoon. Richard from the windy and wet North Downs. Edward Moulding, coming soon to a laptop near you. And Stephen Agger, good afternoon, Richard and everyone. Philip Hammond and Mary, good afternoon, Richard and everyone. And Michael White, howdy. Lee Lawson, ahoy there, Julia, and ahoy to you. And anybody else who's just coming to us, I always try to put this on just a couple of minutes before we start reading. Bit wet and miserable down here in Worthing, but I have a warming hot ginger and lemon drink, which I have here on the desk, which has become my usual routine for these readings. But I went to the supermarket this morning and I forgot to buy some new. I bought another piece of ginger, but I forgot to buy some lemons. So I'm on my last lemon. What a lemon I am. The house is sold at last, says Leela. I know. Congratulations. It's all over. Oh, God. On to the next saga, whatever the next saga is. Please, let's not have a saga for a while. It is all too much. Ed Loud, after good noonie afters. Good noonie afters to you. Nice to see you. Thank goodness the house is finally sold. I know it's and anybody going through this, and no doubt there will be people, you know, not necessarily watching this, but people who've folks have died and they've inherited a house, or they've managing somebody else's house or whatever. It is such a long process, and having got here, the relief, of course, that it's done. I don't have to go back and check on the lawn or check the roof isn't leaking or that the water hasn't burst or any of those things. We've just got the utilities to pay off now, so we'll wait to see what that all comes to. But hopefully we can march forward and get on. I've been thinking of things I want to do, obviously, and a lot of that involves having the restrictions lifted. Anyway, we are carrying on with our reading, and we're on chapter 46, book 3. And if you remember, in the last episode, Ginger and Sweetie were on the run, which was quite exciting, if I remember rightly. So, here we go. Neither of them remembered how far they walked that first night. They just kept on walking. It was a main road that they'd got onto, and though lorries, big trailer affairs, like the one they'd come on, kept passing them, they didn't try for a lift. A lorry driver might give them away, Ginger said. There were rewards for missing people, he told her, and the lorry drivers might go to the police simply to get the money. But nobody can go on walking all night if the shoe leather stands up to it. And Sweetie's wasn't standing up to it very well. The heel on her right foot had come clean off and had been lost completely, and that meant that she had to walk with a kind of limp. "Do you mind if I have a rest?" she asked, finally. "OK," Ginger told her, "but cut it short. We've got to be in a different part of the country by morning. If we're in a different part of the country, they won't know it's us, see?" "I see," Sweetie answered. And while she was waiting, Ginger found that he needed a rest too. He sat down beside her. Then he started yawning. But he didn't want to admit that he was tired. That would look like giving up too easily. Instead, he started looking around him, trying to inspect the bleak landscape. "Might as well sleep round here," he said. Got to sleep somewhere. It's a good sort of place. Nobody expects us to find us here. That's why I brought you this way." There was the dark outline of a barn farther up the road, and they made their way towards it. But a dog began barking when they tried the door, and they went on farther up the road. It was under a hayrick that they finally dossed down. Ginger chose the hayrick because he heard that hayricks were warm, but perhaps this was the wrong kind of hayrick, because it wasn't warm at all. It was cold and damp, and when they lay down beside it, he found himself up against wet, icy spikes. Sweetie felt the cold too. She was shivering again. He could hear the noise that her teeth made, chattering. He moved up nearer and put his arm round her. "Get you warm this way," he said. "You are nice," Sweetie answered. She was almost asleep by now. It is very sudden, waking up in the open air. There are no degrees to it. At one moment you're asleep, and at the next you're wide awake with the sun splitting your eyes open. The sun itself, too, is brighter, with no blinds and curtains and windows to drain it on the way. Sweetie wasn't awake yet, but Ginger's body had been protecting her. She was lying there, her head supported on one arm, and her hair tumbled across her face. It was raven black hair, and in the morning sunlight it gleamed and shone at him. Suddenly, he wanted to stroke it. It was the first thought of that kind that he'd ever had about Sweetie, and it surprised him. He got up stiffly and moved away. "I must be going balmy," he told himself, "clean balmy, or I'd never have wanted to do it." Then a different kind of thought came to him. "Good thing I don't have to shave," he reflected. "If I did, I'd look awful." Because it was quite light by now, broad daylight in fact, he went back and roused Sweetie. And the same curious feeling about her came over him. He didn't know where to touch her, and suddenly felt shy about touching her at all. But he couldn't just let her lie there. That would be asking for trouble. So he used his boot, pushing it under her and poking her ribs and wriggling it. They moved on almost straight away. But they couldn't go so fast as they had done the previous night. Where the heel had come off Sweetie's shoes, the nail had been left showing, and it had worked its way up through the leather. Her heel was swollen now. It was as much as she could do to take the first few steps at all. Hang on a minute, I've just got to sort out my drink. Poor old Sweetie with her swollen heel, and Ginger desperately trying to fight off those pubescent urges. Stephen Agger says, "Same here, Richard. All the stuff I want to do, the restrictions need to be lifted." Absolutely, we all want it. We all want it. It had been Ginger's idea that they should cut across the country so they should avoid any posse of policemen who may be lying in wait for them at the crossroads. But with Sweetie's bad foot, that was impossible, and in any case the precaution proved unnecessary. The roads were unguarded. It was a fine, golden, empty sort of morning, and they could have gone anywhere. "When we get to a shop, I'll buy some biscuits," Ginger said at last. "We can't eat them while we're still going." We can eat them while we're still going." The fear of Doncaster and its police force was still on him, and he felt anxious and apprehensive as soon as they stopped anywhere. Not that Sweetie seemed to be put out about missing breakfast. "Thank you," was all she said. "I like biscuits." They brought the broken kind at one shop they came to because they were cheaper. But the broken ones was a mistake. There were too many sweet ones among them. And when you're hungry, really hungry, that is, it isn't the sweet ones that you want most. It's something plain, like bread and butter, or potatoes, or meat. Sweetie and Ginger thought about all of those as they walked, and they thought about other things that they'd like to drink, like cocoa and milk and lemonade. Altogether, they covered about 5 miles, thinking of food and drink all that way. The stops they'd made by the roadside had grown longer, and stretches of the road between them had grown shorter. Sweetie just hadn't got the strength to keep going any further. That worried Ginger. All the time they were resting, he could feel the police catching up with them. And once they had to crouch down in a hedge when a slow policeman cycled past them. He was out searching, Ginger reckoned, scouring the countryside for the two of them, and he made Sweetie pull his cap lower over her head so that even the stray little bits of hair wouldn't show. Because he was tired himself, Ginger's manners were growing a bit ragged. "You ought to cut it off before we started," he said, after a second attempt to get the cap on properly. "It's Potty mucking it up because it's Potty mucking everything up because a lot of hair." "I'm sorry," Sweetie answered. "I didn't think." "Well, you should have," he told her. And it was that last remark that made Sweetie cry. Ginger knew that she was crying, but he was determined not to take any notice because he hoped that she would stop soon. Besides, he hadn't said anything to make her cry. Nothing at all that could have made anyone cry. But he felt ashamed about it all the same, and awkward too. It was difficult walking with someone who was 2 paces behind him and in tears. When he could stand it no longer, he stopped and waited for her. "What you crying for?" he asked. "It's nothing," Sweetie answered. "I'm just sorry. I've made things difficult for you. I should never have come." Ginger softened. "That's all right," he said, awkwardly. "Don't you worry." Now that she was close to him, he could see how pale she was. Her face was dirty with dust, and the tears had run down it, leaving channels. But even under the dust, the skin still showed white, whiter than he remembered it. "You're not ill, are you?" he asked. "I'm all right," Sweetie said. Only just a bit tired." He put his arm round her. "Gotta go on a bit further," he said. "Can't stop here. I'll get you some real food soon. Then you feel better." It was another 3 miles before they came on to the next village, and Ginger kept his arm around her all the way. He could feel now how thin she was. There didn't seem to be anything inside her at all, except the overall. There didn't seem to be anything to her inside that overall. He was surprised now that she'd even been able to walk as far as this. Get you some real food now," he said again. "Get you the kind of food you like." But he was cautious all the same. He didn't want anyone in the village to get suspicious, so he made Sweetie wait on the outskirts, and he went into the village shop alone. It was a very nice little shop, and it seemed to sell everything. He could have bought cough cures and hair brushes and leather boot laces and bunion plasters if he had wanted them, but he saw straight away what it was he really wanted. There was a dish of real food on the counter, a thick, rich-looking black pudding. At the thought of Sweetie waiting somewhere up the road, he suddenly became extravagant. "Threepenny of that," he said, pointing, and looking round the shop, he saw another of those thick, wonderful slabs of fruit cake that he had bought Sweetie at his Hammersmith coffee stall. "And threepenny north of that," he added. That was 6pence gone out of his 1 and a penny. At one go too. But he still didn't feel he'd done enough for Sweetie, not after making her cry like that. Another pennyworth of those," he said, pointing. It was bull's-eyes that he had ordered this time. Then, as the shopkeeper handed him the screw of paper, a wave of coldness passed through him. He realised what he has done. All the money that he now had left was sixpence that really wasn't his. But he'd forgot about it again in thinking how excited and how Sweetie would be when she knew what he had bought for her for supper. "Come on," he said. Let's get going. Let's get going somewhere where we can eat this." He paused. "And you better walk in front," he added, "so that nobody know that we're together." "Sorry, Ginger," Sweetie said. "It's no good. I can't go no further." "You're not bad, are you?" he asked, anxiously. Sweetie shook her head. "Only tired," she said. "Just tired. And my foot hurts." Ginger put his arm round her again. "You'll feel better when you've had this," he told her. When they had gone another half-mile or so, and the village looked quite small behind them, Ginger said that they could stop. There was a clump of trees just off the road, and they made towards it. Compared with the bleakness of the moors in the dusk that was gathering around them, the shelter of the trees seemed friendly and comfortable. Ginger helped Sweetie pull her shoe off and then spread out the picnic that he'd bought for them. There was the black pudding and the big chunk of fruit cake, and he was keeping the bullseyes for a surprise afterwards. He divided the pudding carefully and then handed one portion to Sweetie, and it was certainly good. A bit on the rich side perhaps, but exactly what he was needing. He took another bite and he felt better. When he looked up, however, he found that Sweetie wasn't eating. She hadn't so much as taken a nibble of it. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I feel sick," she said. "I couldn't eat anything. I just don't want it." There was something in the way that she said it that angered him. There he was, without a penny to his name, because he had bought food for both of them, and all that Sweetie could think of was to say that she didn't want it. Just that. No thanks, nothing. "Well, if you don't, I don't either," he said suddenly. And as he said it, he threw the whole of his portion away from him. 3 halfpenny worth of black pudding went sailing through the tree trunk. He was bending down to throw the cake away too, but Sweetie stopped him. "Don't do that. It's our breakfast." Not a voice in the house. Everyone's on the edge of their seats. Either that or they've all disappeared. It was 6 o'clock by now, and the night was closing in fast. They saw the moor change from grey to purple and now to black. And as the light faded, the mist began to rise. It lay like smoke in the hollows already, and long damp fingers began reaching into the little wood where they were sitting. Sweetie shivered. "You cold?" Ginger asked. Sweetie nodded. "I am rather," she said. "I'll come up nearer," he told her. Then, after a pause, he spoke again. "Have a bullseye?" he asked. He was glad that she accepted, because they were good bullseyes, and sucking the bullseyes made everything seem better. They became friendly again. "Where do we go tomorrow?" Sweetie asked. "Oh, someplace," Ginger answered. "Someplace I can get a job. We'll be all right. I got that job last time, didn't I? I can get a job any time I want it. Get one tomorrow, come to that. We'll be all right." There was a pause. "Do you know where we are?" Sweetie asked. "Yes," was all that Ginger answered. He was terse and not to be drawn on the subject. That much was obvious, and Sweetie didn't press him. All the same, Ginger wished that she hadn't asked the question at all. He'd been wondering the same thing quite a lot lately. So, as far as he could see, they had come to the wrong part of England altogether. Nobody had ever told him that there was any part of it like this, just fields without hedges and a road with telegraph poles and beside it and mist. And more, because he wanted to hear himself say it, and because he really believed what he was saying, he turned to Sweetie. "It don't go on much longer like this," he said. "There are more towns over the top of the hill, lots of towns. If we don't like the first one, we can move on. I'll get a job once we get over that hill." It was growing colder every minute as he was talking. But he'd got more on than Sweetie. Underneath the overalls, she seemed to be wearing hardly anything. He could hear her shivers right through him. He suddenly got up. "Here, you have my jersey," he told her. But she wouldn't let him take it off. She was all right, she said. Even if he gave her the jersey, she wouldn't wear it. So he sat down beside her again and put both arms round her. She seemed smaller than ever when he held her that way, smaller and somehow pitiable. Her hair was up against her face. It was soft, smooth kind of hair, and he started stroking it. He was sorry for her, and because he was sorry, he loved her. He had never known anyone quite so defenceless before. "Caw," he said. "It must half be rotten being a girl." They didn't sleep much that night because it was too cold for sleep. As soon as they moved away from each other, for a moment the coldness came striking at them, and they just lay there huddled against each other, hoping that it would soon be morning. Their conversation was desultory and broken. "Guess it'll be getting light again in a minute," Ginger remarked at last. "Then we can start moving on." That was about 10 o'clock when he said it, and he found himself wishing that he really knew, that he had a watch, one of those good watches with the luminous figures that you can read in the dark. But even without a watch, he was still confident that at any moment the dawn would be breaking and things getting warmer again. "How long can people live without eating?" It was Sweetie who had spoken, and Ginger considered the point. "About a month," he said. Think of people on rafts." There was a pause. Then Sweetie spoke again. "Ginger," she said. "Yes?" "If I die, would you promise to go on without me?" "What makes you think you're dying?" "I don't think so, only I might. People do die out in the cold, you know." "'Tisn't cold enough for that," Ginger answered. "At least, not yet it isn't." And then, when it must have been nearly midnight, Sweetie asked another of those questions that Ginger would rather not have put to him. "Suppose you don't get a job," she asked. "Suppose neither of us get a job. What are we going to do then?" "I told you, I shall get a job." "But supposing you don't?" "I'll go on looking." "You can't go on looking if you haven't had any food." "I'll steal some." Sweetie paused. She thought about stealing, and she wondered if it had occurred to Ginger too. "But suppose you can't? Suppose it's all locked up," she went on. "We'd have to stop then. We'd have to tell a policeman who we were." Ginger moved away from her. "I shan't never do that," he said fiercely. "I'd rather be dead than get caught." "Do you mean kill ourselves?" Sweetie asked. The question, put directly to Ginger, startled him. He hadn't thought of it like that, but he didn't want to admit that there was anything that he hadn't considered, and in any case he supposed that killing yourself quickly would be better than slowly starving to death in some awful cold place like this one. So he shrugged his shoulders to show that he was prepared for everything. "Yes," he said simply. He imagined that this would settle it. would frighten Sweetie off asking any more of her silly questions. But it didn't. "How?" she asked. And that really did irritate him. He'd just been planning to run away, not to commit suicide. Jump in a river or something," he said. "Now shut up." Sweetie could tell from the tone of his voice that she had offended him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I only wanted to know." That pacified him, and he moved in closer again. "And go to sleep," he told her. "It's nearly morning anyhow. Can't be more than another half-hour now. Guess it's getting lighter already." It was light when he woke again, and Sweetie had spread her coat over him. Oh. Alan Sandell says, "Will she die?" And Turbo Stream says the black pudding doesn't go with fruitcake. No wonder she wasn't hungry. You can't blame her. Oh dear. It's quite traumatic, isn't it? As I wonder they never made a film of this. It would be interesting. It would be interesting. We are now on chapter 47. Are you still enjoying it? Do you want me to stop? Just let me know if it's too much. That it was Sweetie and Ginger's second night in the open. That was Sweetie's and Ginger's second night in the open. And it was the third night away from Archbishop Bodkin Hospital. And though Sweetie and Ginger woke stiff and still shivery to a peaceful October morning, with a gentle mellow hush hanging over the whole landscape, that was only how it looked at first glance. In reality, it was a field day for the country constabulary. The police were hunting in real earnest by now. Breakfast for Sweetie and Ginger didn't amount to much, and that was because the fruitcake had gone soggy in the night. The bit of trouble about the black pudding Ginger had forgotten. After the bit of trouble about the black pudding, Ginger had forgotten to put the fruitcake back inside the bag again, and the dew had got at it. It was like a flat, wet sponge. They didn't break bits off, they scooped. But having nothing to drink was the bad part. The Archbishop Bodkin seniors all had tea for breakfast, great amber rivers of it, poured down big enamel jugs with milk and sugar already mixed up with it. Even Miss Britt hadn't been able to put an end to that. And Sweetie and Ginger both remembered it as they sat there pecking at their handfuls of damp cake crumbs. "Get a drink when we come to the river," Ginger observed at last. "When we come to a river, we'll get a drink." "I want one," Sweetie told him. "That's why I couldn't eat last night." "Well, let's get going," Ginger said firmly. "Got to get over them hills." But he had not reckoned on Sweetie's heel. She'd walked on it for one day too many, and the heel was now red and angry-looking. Even with both of them pushing together, they couldn't get it into the shoe. And in the end, they had to stop trying because of the pain it made, and it made Sweetie feel sick again. That beat Ginger. He squatted down on his haunches, wondering what to do. And finally, it was Sweetie, not Ginger, who decided. She was wearing the Archbishop Bodkin petticoat, and she tore a long strip of it off, and she made a bandage out of it, and finally, just to make sure it didn't come off when she walked, she tied the two ends together round her ankle. "We can go now." Ginger looked at the bandage suspiciously. "People'll notice," he said. But Sweetie only shook her head. "No, they won't," she said. "If anyone asks, I'll say I lost it. People do lose shoes because I've seen them." When they'd gone some distance, they had to leave the verge and take the road itself. Down the slope from the hill in front of them was parked a green post office van. A green post office van, that's interesting. And there was a man perched on the top of a nearby telegraph pole like a monkey up a coconut palm. Ginger paused. That was just what he wanted to avoid, having to go past someone. But the man up the telegraph pole seemed busy enough. He was bending over and concentrated on his work. It must have been windy up there too. Ginger could see that the man had a leather strap round his waist, but even so, he swayed on his perch every time the gust blew. That decided Ginger. If he's doing his job and he's getting blown about, he won't have time to bother about us, Ginger calculated. And turning to Sweetie, he said, "Come on, we ain't getting nowhere." "I'm coming as fast as I can," she said. But the wind was against them. It was coming up the hill at them like little fists. "Caw," thought Ginger. "It'll be rotten if it rains. She'll get wet." And now, when he looked, he was conscious of another feeling too. It was at her hair that he was looking, her hair that he'd been stroking last night when they were huddled up together among the trees. But it was different hair now. It was loose and shining, streaming from her head like a comet's tail. Little wisps of it brushed across his face as he walked. Then suddenly, Ginger's heart gave a bump. This was awful. She looked like a girl and nothing else but a girl. There was no disguising her. "What you done with my cap?" he demanded. "It's gone," Sweetie admitted. "It blew off. I couldn't help it." "Why didn't you say?" "I did try to, only you wouldn't stop. I didn't know you'd mind that much." Not mind? It was no good saying anything now. They were too near the man on the telegraph pole to be able to hang about any longer. "Well, come on, can't you?" Ginger said. "Don't stop talking, and just stop talking and keep your hand over your hair. You don't want people to see you." It was the sight of a girl walking along with her hand on her head that first made the post office linesman take any real notice of them. Up there in that wind with a cracked insulator on his hands, he had plenty to do without playing at being a sheriff. But when he looked, he became interested. The girl seemed to have hurt her foot. She had a bandage or something round it. And then he remembered there'd been a paragraph about a boy and a girl in the evening newspaper. And there they were to the life, the boy with red hair, the girl with black, and apparently trying to go north like the paper said. He could get through to the exchange whenever he wanted to. The telephone instrument was hanging from a hook on his belt. It was so easy. He passed the word up the line that he had seen the two runaways, or thought he had. Then he got back to his broken insulator. He was not a melodramatic sort of chap, just sensible. He didn't go charging off in the post office van trying to collar them. In fact, he didn't do anything else after that, apart from reminding himself that there would be something to tell his wife, and then he forgot all about them. But the police got busy straight away. Within 5 minutes, a blue Wolseley was drawing out of the yard of the police station, and it was on its way towards the moors. Even so, Sweetie and Ginger had moved on by then, going across country again, and it's doubtful whether the two policemen sitting inside the saloon car on the main road would ever have found them if it had not been for the Arkley-Dale and District Ramblers League. The Ramblers were coming over the moor, 30 strong, with rucksacks swinging and bare knees glinting in the sunshine. At the sight of the police car, they stiffened. They had been in trouble with the police over a rights of way, and they immediately suspected something sinister like a plot to close the moors to hikers. But when the sergeant merely asked them whether they'd seen a boy with red hair and a girl on the fells, they relaxed. And more than relaxed, they gloated. The fugitives, they said, were sheltering in a small copse on the way over to the reservoir. and suddenly becoming enthusiastic about the whole affair, like hikers, the hikers suggested that they fanned out across the moor and they could come down sickle shape, cutting off all hope of escape, while the two policemen took the direct path and made a neat arrest. It was Sweetie who first noticed that something unusual was happening. She was seated beside Ginger in a small spinney and wasn't looking at anything in particular. The bare moor extended on 3 miles to the side of them, and down in the valley below lay a great lake walled by concrete. The lake reflected the clouds and was beautiful. If only there had been some way of getting a meal, and if Ginger could have found a job in those parts, she would have been content to stay there forever. Then she noticed something moving, or rather a whole collection of somethings. As she looked closely, she could see that there were a lot of people, and they were advancing in a long curved line. She watched them with the casual interest of someone looking at something that can be of no possible personal concern. She was merely interested. And then she looked away. She didn't even tell Ginger, who seemed cross and sulky about something. But when she looked again, the long line of people had come much nearer. The nearest of them could not have been more than 1/4 of a mile by now, and it had become so interesting that she told Ginger. She was surprised how excited he was immediately. He scanned the whole line of them and then looked directly behind where Sweetie hadn't been looking. And what he saw, he was prepared for. Climbing up the steep path to the spinney were 2 policemen. "Come on, Ginger, it's the cops!" There was only one clear way for them, and that was down towards the reservoir. It lay below them in the hillside, with its high stone wall cutting off the end of the valley, and the hillside fell away sharply. Sweetie and Ginger were not merely running now, they were falling and scrambling. He had hold of her hand too and was pulling her. As they ran, they heard the shouts behind them. Then when they turned for a moment, they saw the row of figures up against the skyline. The ground in front of them dropped away. It was the little edge that they had come to. "Can you jump?" Ginger was asking. "I'll go down first and catch you." It was then that Sweetie really understood what it was like to be hunted, knew why Ginger had said that he would never give himself up alive. Her heart was banging about inside her, and her little mouth was dry. But these were only physical sensations. These were the only physical sensations she was aware of. Even when she jumped and landed on her damaged foot, she didn't feel it. All that she wanted to do was escape from the shouting and the running feet that were behind her. They had reached the grounds of the reservoir by now, and a long row of spiked railings confronted them. But Ginger seemed to know all about spiked railings. He put his foot sideways between the spikes and jumped over as easily as if it had been made for climbing. He didn't even tumble when he landed, but he was breathless. "Put your foot up there," he said hoarsely. "I'll pull you." There was now nothing between them and the wall of the reservoir. It looked taller than it had done from the distance. It towered. But there was a long flight of stone steps dwindling up to the summit, and they made for them. "We gotta hurry," Ginger said. "I'll help you." They reached the first landing before they looked down, and it was not bad. The spike railings were doing their work nicely. Only one of the hikers had got over, and the rest were clustered in groups trying to help each other. But one was enough for Ginger. "Faster," he said. "We've got to go faster." "I can't," Sweetie began saying. "I'm trying, but I can't." She knew then that it was hopeless. She wasn't as strong as Ginger. She couldn't keep up with him. Because of her, they would catch him, and that must never happen. "Go on, you go on, leave me here," she said. "Shut up," was all the answer he gave. "You hurry." They reached the top of the wall by now, and they were on a kind of level horseshoe concrete road. It was wide and level, and on one side, 10 feet below them, lay the lake itself, dark and cold-looking. And seen close, it wasn't so placid as it looked from the hillside. There were waves on it, and spray where the waves came slapping against the concrete. But it was better than the other side. There was a 40-foot drop there, with rocks and boulders at the bottom of it. "Come on," Ginger was saying. "Don't start looking." But no boy dragging a girl behind him can run as fast as a man, and already there were others on the concrete roadway. One of the policemen had got up there, and it was obvious that he was in training. And after his climb, he still seemed to have plenty of breath in him. He was fairly pounding along after them. In less than 10 seconds, he was leading. It was the sound of the footsteps closing in on them that decided Sweetie. They were nearer now, only 10 yards away, or 8, or 5. In another moment, he would be on them. He'd be grabbing at her. Suddenly, she snatched her hand away from Ginger's. She was right on the edge of the wall, now, with the black water just beneath. "You go on," she called after him. "I'm doing like you said, Ginger." Then she jumped. And we're on chapter 48. Oh my God. I just need a moment to contain myself. Edward Moulding is looking to see where it is. Is it Rutland Water? Alan Sandell saying, getting tense, isn't it? It is getting tense. My goodness. My heart was pounding and I'm reading it. I have read it before. I can't remember what happens. Mustn't look now. Mustn't look. Gives it away. I can't remember if they die. You wouldn't think they would, but I can't remember what happens. No, we can't possibly leave it there, says the lovely Julia. No, we've still got time. We still have time. We still have time. Oh, dear, oh, dear. Chapter 48. But that wasn't by any means the end of Sweetie. They fished her up again, and before she'd even been down for a second time, they fished her up again before she'd even been down for a second time. Admittedly, she looked a pretty forlorn sort of figure in the policeman's arms, with her face deathly white and her dark hair plastered across her forehead, but she was still breathing, and that was the only thing that mattered. It was Ginger who caused the real trouble, and that was because he had tried to do the gallant thing by her. When Sweetie jumped, he jumped in after her. And he was not so lucky as Sweetie. On his way down, he struck one of the big stone bastions that projected into the water, and it stunned him. In consequence, when he reached the surface, he simply disappeared under it. They were nearly 5 minutes searching for Ginger. And when they did find him, it looked hopeless. They used artificial respiration, kneeling in the small of his back and squeezing the water out of his lungs before they could get a single breath into him. The news that the fugitives had been found reached the Archbishop Bodkin while a board meeting was in progress. It was an emergency governors' meeting called specially to discuss the two runaways, and already feelings were running high. There were rival factions. One, led by old Miss Bodkin, was for forgiveness, complete unconditional forgiveness. The other, dominated by Canon Larkin, insisted on punishment, on bringing it forcibly home to the miscreants what trouble and anxiety they'd caused their elders and betters. Dr. Trump, as it happened, had just been asked for his view, and frowning, he cleared his throat in readiness. I can see no other way, he was saying. There is merely the truancy and the undesirable publicity. There's also the theft, the 3 shillings, remember. I can see no alternative. I fear that we must proceed. That is, of course, assuming they're both all right. It was at this point that the message from the local police station was brought in to the meeting. Its effect was tremendous. For a moment there was silence, complete silence, as though the entire boardroom, chairs, tables and everything had uttered up a sigh. And then, with the knowledge that Sweetie and Ginger were both living, the two sides, the forgiveness group and the punishment group, both started up again. Finally it was Dame Eleanor who tapped sharply on the table with the handle of her lorgnette, whatever that is, Lorgnette, lorgnette, and summoned things up for the lot of them. "Well," she said bitterly, "there's one thing that you may depend on, and that is that it is out of our hands now. We haven't heard the end of this yet, not by a long chalk we haven't." And Dame Eleanor was right. The press alone would have been enough to see to that. Sweetie and Ginger had been working their way steadily upwards. They were front-page banner headlines by now, and though Dr. Trump didn't know it at the time, there was still plenty in reserve to keep the item going. Take Margaret's part in the affair, for instance. The moment she knew that Sweetie had been found, she went to her. Leaving basins, and worse, emptied, she went up to her room, changed into her outdoor clothes, and slipped out of the hospital. 40 minutes later, with £2 that she had drawn from her post office savings account, she had bought a ticket for Archbishop and was already on the train on the way up there. It occurred to her only when the train had reached Rugby and was getting underway again in its journey north that perhaps she should have told Dr. Trump where she was going. The omission, as it happened, was unfortunate, for the press promptly got onto her story too, and Dr. Trump, tired and nervous as he was, allowed himself to be trapped, asked if it were true that Margaret was missing too. He replied that he had no idea where she was. That was enough for the press, and by the time Dr. Trump opened his evening paper, he was front-page news again. "Runaway Hall" was the heading, and the mischievous black type continued gloatingly, "Third Bodkin fugitive in 4 days, ward maid missing." Indeed, the strain of the past few days had been intolerable. Dr. Trump had not eaten. He had not slept. He had not done anything, in fact, except walk up and down his study, wondering, waiting for the telephone to ring, praying. And now, with the knowledge that Sweetie and Ginger were safe, a weakness that he had tried to fight against had come over him. He felt tired, feeble, enervated, never heard of that word, was even angry with himself for being so anxious. He despised himself. But no matter how tired he felt, there was no opportunity for resting. The police alone would have been good enough to see to that. They were round morning, noon and night, from ordinary police constables up to chief inspectors with their big boots and their small notebooks, making what they called routine inquiries. And it was only Sweetie and Ginger in whom they were interested. So far as Margaret was concerned, there was nothing to excite them there. She was merely someone giving her right name and an address that could easily be verified, who had gone off rather unexpectedly. They ignored her. But about Sweetie and Ginger, they wanted to know everything. Ancestry, as far as ascertainable, physical history, criminal tendencies, punishments. They examined the punishment book and took down an exact record of the number of strokes that Ginger had received on each occasion. They visited the cell in which Sweetie had been confined and took measurements of the size, the height, and the window above the ground, the distance of the bed from the door. They tramped through the dormitories, walked imperiously into the imperiously into the kitchens, even went up and down the fire escapes. And as soon as they had departed, there were other visitors. An inspector called from a child welfare society. The governors began endeavouring to find out what was really going on. 3 probation officers, 2 male, 1 female, arrived on the same day. And finally, just when everything seemed to be dying down, the Home Office announced that it intended to hold an inquiry. And I think we better leave the next bit for the next chapter, because that's another whole thing in itself. Oh my, oh my. How about that? You never expected to go on a journey up north onto the moors and the old reservoir and all of that. My goodness. Oh, Hinge and Bracket. Sue Hinge and Bracket. What are you on about? I have to go, says Michael White. Congrats on the sales of the house. Thank you very much. Spectacles without arms. Are they mounted on thin sticks to hold up your eyes? What are you talking about? I'm a sucker for a happy ending. Yes, well, let's hope that it is. I'm sure it is. But blimey, what a cliffhanger. There we go. How about that? A trip across the moors. It was lovely. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it's been interesting today. Poor old Sweetie and Ginger. But they are alive. God knows what's going to happen next. A storm is brewing, says Dudley Sawyer, literally, or metaphysically, or physically outside. There you go. Who knows? Is the Archbishop Bodkin Hospital going to shut down? Will Dr. Trump lose his job? What will happen to Ginger and Sweetie? And where has Margaret gone? And what is her part? I can't remember. There's this thing I keep thinking, and I remember thinking it the first way round, and I can't remember. Is Margaret Sweetie's real mother? That was what I keep thinking, and I can't remember, because she gets this job and she's attached to Sweetie, and I wonder if she is the real mother, which is why she stays there. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, a cruel and callous cliffhanger enforced upon us, says Ed Loud. Absolutely. Brilliant today, Richard. Thank you. Grand. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back with the Vobe show. We've got lots of videos come in for the Vobe One-Eyed Kenobi Shobi, which will be on later on. Julia says that was her suspicion as well. I can't remember. But that might be too obvious with Norman Collins. That might be what he wants us to think. Confused, says Lee Lawson. You will be after this week's episode of Soap. Thank you, Richard, for another fine reading. Thank you very much. Very intense chapter that was. Take care, and I will catch up with you either tomorrow here or on the Vobe show or on another video. Anyway, there we are. Batten down the hatches, says Dudley. So yeah, better batten them down. I think we've got a bit of wind coming. Take care. Nice to see you. And have a good rest of the afternoon / evening. Till next time. Bye-bye.